I recently attended an event where journalist Judy Woodruff interviewed famed architect Santiago Calatrava. That interview surfaced two issues that show up routinely in the workplace, at management meetings, sales meetings, industry conferences, and during all-hands employee meetings. What do these venues have in common? Frequent programming that features interviews, moderators hosting a panel of experts, Emcees talking with guests from the audience, speakers asking for input from volunteers in the audience. All of these things in common. Let me get more specific about three difficult situations. Here are three tips for how to handle these difficult situations in emceeing, interviewing, and Q&A from the audience. 1. A change of mood. Immediately prior to Woodruff's segment on the program, another speaker had given a heart-wrenching story about her husband's struggle with cancer and eventual death. She was talking about leaving her with 3 small children. It would have been a major mistake for Judy Woodruff to open her interview with lighthearted banter with the audience. So what was her response, her technique? In this case, Ms. Woodruff took the stage, paused, greeted the hushed audience in a subdued manner. Then she commented with empathy on the previous speaker's story and asked the audience to applaud one more time with admiration for the young woman's courage and her action in that situation. That segue allowed her to lift the mood and move the audience along to a lighter mood for the next interview that was to follow. Here's some other techniques for similar situations when you need to change the mood of the audience. Ask the audience to turn to someone and share their feelings or their insights or their next step based on what they've just heard in the previous segment. The energy in the room will invariably rise just because of the simultaneously sharing and the noise. Then you can segue to a lighter moment. Another technique in that situation, summarize what's gone before with one more call to action in the way previously mentioned. Or simply allow more time to pause as you take the stage, enter more slowly than usual, deliver a more subdued introduction than you might normally use. Gradually, you'll change the energy level and emotional setting during that first few moments. Another difficult situation, heavy accents in our global workplace. It's quite common that the audience may be listening to someone who speaks the language of their audience as their second or even third or maybe even fourth language. In this situation, Woodruff's assignment at the meeting was interviewing an accomplished guest who was a second language English speaker with a heavy accent and a penchant for digging into the technical details of his craft. So what was her response or technique? Well, Woodruff asked her questions of the guest in a very simple sentence structure. She repeated each question in a couple of different ways before she turned the floor over to the guest. That rewording and that timing ensured that the interviewee understood clearly what she was asking. Then after the architect's answer, she summarized for the audience very succinctly what he had said. There are other techniques that you can use for similar situations. You can use your facial expression to communicate very subtly to the guest that you don't understand what's being said. The speaker will often rephrase the idea, whether it's the question or the response, several ways so that it's easier to understand. Another technique, you can own the problem yourself with humor. Something like, I didn't have my caffeine this morning. Can you repeat that question or that phrase a little again? You're owning the misunderstanding. Or you can label the problem as a hearing issue. Can you say that louder, please? I didn't catch that. Maybe you're asking for questions from the audience. Another technique, if the person with the accent is in the audience, make eye contact with others seated nearby and say, what did you say? I'm sorry, I didn't catch that. And they'll often speak up with more clarity. Surprise questions, that's another problem or a technique. You don't want to embarrass the person. As an author, I've done thousands of radio, TV, print, podcast interviews, and with the exception of radio hosts, virtually all journalists send questions or at least topics to their guests ahead of time. Why? They don't want your off-the-cuff comments. They want your considered comments, your true feelings, your true insights and ideas and specific data or stories. Of course, the host may ask spontaneous follow-up questions, but very rarely do they just wing it through an entire interview. If both guest and host are great at their jobs, the interview may sound spontaneous, but it doesn't just happen that way. Other techniques for similar situations: in lieu of sending questions to interviewees ahead of time, ask your guest to suggest questions they'd like for you to ask. Or survey your audience ahead of time to ask what questions they want the guest to respond to, and then forward those questions to the guest. Or another technique, ask your audience to add questions in a chat box if you're doing this online, and then your guests can answer the ones they'd like to respond to and omit the ones they'd rather not respond to. So if you're interviewing, emceeing, or moderating some event, whether a telephone conference, an expert panel for live broadcast, or planning an executive panel to take questions from your employee audience, don't think surprise, instead think preparation. Interviews work well as long as you, the moderator, do.